Hello, my name is Matthias Rehm. I'm professor for human-machine interaction at Aalborg University in Denmark. Today I am going to present work of my former graduate students, which is called Interaction Initiation with the Museum Guide Robot, from the lab into the field. This project is based on two of our research interests, and the first one has to do with the fact that when we deploy our systems in the field, test our prototypes, there's always more than one user present interacting with the system, and this is usually independent of the context in which we are working. So for instance, in institutional care facility, there might be care personnel around. On a public event, there's an audience that also has an influence on the interaction. So we look at moving beyond dyadic interaction, where we assume a single user interacting with the system, to group interactions with our system. The second topic that we're interested in is called enculturated interaction. So the idea that our cultural upbringing, our cultural experience has an influence on the way we interact with technology. And again, we work in different fields there. So for instance, we have a long-standing collaboration with Namibia, where we look at dissemination of indigenous knowledge. We had projects across different cultures, Germany, Japan, for example, where we looked at non-verbal behavior in interaction and how we can model that with virtual or physical agents. So in this project, we bring these two interests together when we look at the interaction with a robot at a museum. And when we look at museums, then we have both these types of interaction that we can investigate, because usually what we see is that there are more than one user present in the museum. So we have interaction with diverse groups like families, couples, friends, school classes, and so on. And all these individuals in the groups have different motivations for being there and for interacting with the artwork, or in our case then with the robot at the museum. Maybe they think it's fun to go there. Maybe they want to learn something. Maybe they want to impress their girlfriend by bringing her to a museum. Also, we have different status between different group members. So if we look at a family, we have the parents, we have the children there. They have different status. They have different roles in the interaction. And this is different from a visit by a school class, where we have different peers that run around in the museum. On the other hand, the museum is a place where we can expect visitors from different locations, different countries, thus different cultures. But we can also expect on a, let's call it a lower level, subcultures that visit the museum. So for instance, we tested our system at an architectural museum where we, for instance, find architecture students as visitors, and they have a completely different background knowledge than school children that visit the museum, or a family that comes to the museum. So on different levels, culture and knowledge about the topics here might play a role in the interaction. To investigate these different aspects, we followed a two-step process. First step was a controlled lab study where we looked at cross-cultural aspects that we could find in the museum context, and we evaluated the technical setup that we have set up. And then we ran a field study, which was done to investigate these group interactions that will happen in the museum, and of course was also a stress test for the technical setup that we have created. So the lab study was necessary from our point of view because we can see in general that there are cultural differences when an interaction is initiated, and we looked at that some 12 years ago, where we found that there is a difference in greeting length, gesture use, and topic introduction when we compared German and Japanese users. For the museum context, we know from a study by Yusuf et al. How interactions are initiated based on an ethnographic study they did with Japanese museum guides. So this could serve as our foundation for modeling the behavior of the robot. But then, with what we know about differences in interaction initiation, the question is if this also holds true for Danish context. So that led us to this idea of replicating the experiment by Yusuf et al. To investigate if we can find any cultural effects that have to be taken into account. And we can see the setup here. So we have two conditions. One we can call socially oriented, the other task oriented. Where in the first case the robot moves to the visitors, greets them, and then moves to the artwork and starts explaining the artwork. In the task-oriented scenario, the visitors are standing at the artwork, the robot moves towards them and starts explaining the artwork. So we miss out on this initial greeting initiation phase. We run a experiment with 16 groups, 2 persons within subject design, and what we can see there is that we can confirm the results from the Japanese study regarding the robot behavior. So there were some clear preferences to what kind of behavior our visitors regard as appropriate. So one conclusion from that for us is that in this specific case the national culture does not seem that important because there we might have an expectation of, for instance, a different preference for the topic introduction, but that the museum might serve as its own cultural context where we can actually rely on similar behavior across different cultures. Having verified that we can use these models or this behavior that we find in the literature, we set up the explorative field study at the museum. And this is the Utzon Center at Aalborg, which is an architecture museum where, for instance, different architecture models are on display. So we ran this experiments to evaluate the performance of the robot and explore how visitors in the context of a real museum will interact with the robots. And again, you can see the setup here, and in this case the robot is controlled in a Wizard of Oz fashion because we wanted to be able to react to the different interactions that the visitors might show here. We started a qualitative data collection, so we did some video observations and analyzed those. We also did interviews with the users to ask a bit into their experience with this interaction with the robot. In all, we had 26 participants for the field study in groups of various sizes, from 1 person up to 4 persons. And I just give you some of the main results here. So first of all, if we look, for instance, at the spatial orientation, which plays a role, especially with these varying group sizes, we can see that the formations that are created with the robots were depending on the number of participants and the interaction phase. So was it the beginning, was it the explanation of the artifact, and so on. So this is in line with Kendon's analysis of the F-formation system, which is very nice. So we can actually treat the robot as one participant in this interaction and in this building up of the formation in which they stand to investigate this artwork. What we also see is the focus of attention. Sometimes it's problematic because participants sometimes excluded the artwork from their formations by focusing only on the robot. So that means in this case the robot needs to guide the attention of the users by using, for instance, non-verbal means like gestures, or by active participation in the building of the formations. So here we see a very good example where we have a formation where the robot can easily explain the model, and the users or the visitors have the possibility to watch the robot, but also to pay attention to the model that is explained. And then last factor is a bit about the technical setup. So we can see that the voice that the Pepper has, which is a bit comic-like, works well for the lab setup. It fits to the design of the robot, but is actually not appropriate for this larger public space where it's a bit too high-pitched and difficult to understand at times. So this is a little technical side note that we found here. So as a take-home message for you, I would like to say that while we can find differences in first meeting communication across cultures, the museum guiding context seems to be a cultural context of its own. The field study shows that people are accepting towards the idea of a guide robot and follow social, and in this case especially spatial norms for the group interaction, although the robot is actually rather small. And it might be necessary for the robot to actively participate in building the spatial layout for the presentation. And then again, technical aspects, the visitors did overall not like the speed and the voice quality of the robot, so this is something we might work with in terms of designing the system and changing these aspects of the robot. So thank you very much for your attention. If you want to know more, here are some links, and otherwise you can see the people here that did the actual work and that are now distributed across different countries in Europe doing work as developers and designers.